people in comment. Am I still hot? No? You know what? It's because some genius did not turn this on. How's that? Is that better? We doing better? Is that hot? Is that hot? How we doing? Okay. All right. Yeah, you're right. Okay, we have a question right here.
So in the Old Testament, was that such an issue, people sleeping with their father's wives, that he had to keep reiterating that in Leviticus? And if so, why? Why was that such an issue?
You have to remember what the children of Israel were up against. They were constantly going back to gods that didn't do them any good at all. They were constantly being influenced by those around them. And if you ever get a chance to see what the Canaanites were into, they were into that and worse. And so it was a problem. And we see that especially in the book of Judges, where the whole tribe of Benjamin, as we looked at before, was given over to homosexuality. And it was a problem. Yes, it was. Yeah, the victory that we have over this problem is the victory of the church. It is. The pagans didn't come up with it, for the most part. Not even Rome was that bad at the time, but it got that bad over time. Yes, with a question.
So, close for all altars, that's a problem. How did God work that out with Adam and Eve? I mean, obviously, they were the first two, and can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah, sure can. And yeah, because the question always comes up, well, who did Seth and Cain and Abel, who did they marry? And in fact, they did marry their sisters. They did indeed. This is something that that did not begin as a problem or as a prohibition. It became a prohibition under Moses. I'll give you a quick example. I think a lot of times we don't understand Lot and his two daughters. I'm going to defend Lot's two daughters here, which they don't get a whole lot of defense. But I'm going to try it right now. They named their two. They got their father drunk. And they each had a child by their father, and their names were Moab and Ammon, or Ben-Ammi, if you will. And those two names mean one name means son of my father, and another means son of my kinsman. And that was something that at that point was acceptable, because we didn't have the prohibitions. But we do have a hint as to why it's a prohibition. For example, we have intermarriage with family with Adam and Eve's children, and we also have intermarriage in with cousins some other place where it was necessary. You know when that was, right? Certainly after the flood, right? There's nobody left. So we see that for whatever reason, God is saying we're going to spread this marriage thing out here. And then by the time you get to the children of Israel, when you have an entire generation of people, these are the things that we're not going to do. It wasn't just your kinsmen either. Of course, we know Moses talked about marrying unbelievers, that type of a thing. And God can do that. I hear people say, well, and I've heard this. Well, looks like God is really inconsistent because, he prohibited marrying your sister, but then where did Cain get his wife? You've heard that one. Well, you know what? God can give progressive revelation if he wants. He doesn't have to be bound by what we think he's supposed to be bound by. And he did give us progressive revelation in this sense, and we do have that picture. Adam and Eve, marrying within the family, the children of Noah, marrying cousins. But it was going further and further apart. And you could really argue that Moses anticipated the problem of intermarriage, because we know about that now. I don't think people knew about it then. And I'm convinced that Moses' prohibition sounded funny and odd to those people. But now we know. Yes?
I guess I'm a little curious what you mean by, or what Paul meant by giving over to Satan. I mean, is that the actual process of excommunication, or is that something different? What does that actually look like?
Yeah. Is that a formal church meeting, like, we now give this person over to Satan? The church is described as a flock. A flock is something that needs protection. Pastors are called shepherds. I think we have a problem with this concept because we changed the concept of church. Follow me on this. Church, for the most part, in this time, has become more of maybe a giant group therapy session. You know, I go there, I feel good, I see, got all kinds of stuff that I like, and it makes me feel good. The idea of church being a place of protection, and that your pastor's job is to protect the flock, I think that's a foreign concept to us a lot now. I mean, I can just drift into a church, drift out, whatever, sit in my seat, whatever. No one knows I'm here or not, whatever. Whatever. But you look at, in times past, and especially during the time of the Reformation, they took it very seriously. During the colonial period of our past history in this country, pastors were serious about heresy. They interacted with those that they felt were promoting heresy, and they defended their flock. And what I think that really means is you're taking away the protection of the shepherd and the flock from this person, and he's got nothing left but Satan then, because he has no protection. Interestingly enough, in a lot of our modern churches, where it is the giant group therapy session, do they practice excommunication? Clearly not. They don't do it. And why don't they? You see, I would argue that if you don't practice excommunication, a difficult subject and not fun, but if you don't practice it, you don't practice that, then at the same time you're not protecting your flock. I would definitely argue that. Good questions. Do we have another one?
So in Leviticus 20, verse 11, it talks about the punishment. So for a man that had blasphemed his father's wife, it says he has uncovered his father's nakedness, both of them shall surely be put to death, their blood is upon them. So, obviously Paul is not recommending the death penalty, but...
I don't think he's backing off from it either, but finish it.
So, like, you know, how is what Paul's recommending different than what actually happened, would happen in the Old Testament?
Sure. Yeah, in the Old Testament, remember, Caesar must bow down to God just like everybody else. And the civil magistrate will answer to God just like everybody else. And the civil magistrates the kings of the earth, are called to worship Christ just like everybody else. But Paul knows that the church does not have the power of the sword. That's in the hands of the state. So he's talking to a church. He's not saying that he would be against that particular punishment. We know that Christ endorsed the death penalty for cursing parents. You know that, right? Jesus Christ endorsed the death penalty for cursing one's parents. Did you know that? Check out Matthew 15:4. Check it out sometime. Whoever curses his mother and father, let him die the death. But you say. So Paul's not taking off the table. He's simply telling the church what they're allowed to do. See, the church has power over spiritual death, the state over physical death. Now, when I say power over spiritual death, I want to be really careful when I say that. Because the church cannot condemn anyone to hell. But the church can treat them as a non-believer. We may not know exactly what the spiritual condition is. We're not told to declare it, but we are told them how to treat it. Good questions this morning. It's kind of funny how you get the best questions with the most difficult passages sometimes. Yes?
Well,
I'm sorry.
all through this, Jesus Christ was in the Old Testament. He's the one that they know them all down. So the New Testament churches, I don't understand how they can say, well, they're just in the New Testament church. You don't, the scriptures weren't written at that time. It was, all they had was the Old Testament.
The curse of Marcionism is still with us. Marcion, that heretic that lived about 200 AD, who taught that there were two different gods. There's the Old Testament God, mean, nasty, vengeful. The New Testament God is going to try love. He actually taught there were two different gods. I say the curse of Marcionism is still with us today. Two gods. Okay, it's not like we don't believe in two gods, but it's like we believe in a God who kind of grew up. Right.
I wish I can say I've never viewed pornography.
Wish I could.
Which is awesome. I wish I could say that. But there are, sometimes, I don't know, thought, you protect yourself any way you possibly can, but your mind is still with you. You know what I mean? And sometimes images, years back. What do you do to maybe, I don't know, overcome thoughts or, 'cause, I mean, most people do struggle with their mind sometimes, you know what I mean? And I tell myself, that's part of the struggle. You gotta overcome, but is that the way to look at it, or?
Yeah.
How do you, how do you?
Okay, I want to address that. If there's anyone else that wants to address that, feel free to. We won't hold it against you if you don't. This is very highly personal stuff and very difficult stuff here, but necessary. Thank you for that question, Jack. Recently, I was reading something online that had, I was doing some research, and I was in a completely, what I thought, clean situation. Somebody had asked a question, and it was actually about Christ's death on the cross. And somebody posted something that was just so vile, and I just read it before I even, it was vile. And I read it before I even, and that put a picture in my head that I had a hard time getting rid of, and just now even me talking about it, now it's back. Because I remember what it was. I think there's two things going on here, Shaq. The first one is that, yes, we will not be protected from temptation any more than, any kind of temptation any more than what Christ was. He was not, even Christ was not protected from temptation. He was tempted. The second thing is, though, is that we have to be able to do something that I think a lot of people say you can't do, and that is concentrate and direct our minds. Our minds are somewhat like breathing, somewhat. I mean, you can breathe without thinking about it, but you can stop breathing for a little while. And our minds are somewhat like that. When you think about stuff, you're driving or whatever, and something pops into your head, but you can concentrate on something else. And one of the great, I think, offenses of pornography is that it takes a good gift that God says He gave to me. That's my wife. Okay, God says that's a very good gift. And what pornography does is say that my wife isn't good enough, and it's saying to God, what you gave me is not good enough. I deserve better. And it's completely offensive to my wife and completely offensive to God. So one thing I do, anyone can chime in here. One thing I know I do is when that happens to me, and we all know, men, maybe women too, you're driving down the road and you're fine. Maybe you're thinking some good thoughts about Christ, His Word, whatever. You're working out a theological problem. We do this, men, right? We read something and try to work that out. And we're working that out as we're driving down the road. And then there's a billboard. And all of a sudden you got a little war on your hands that you didn't ask for. But there it is. And I know one thing that I do is at that moment I try to thank God for my wife. Not everybody's married. I get that, so if you're not married, maybe that's a little harder. But I thank God for my wife, and I just pray and thank Him for the good gift that He's given me, called my wife. I find oftentimes I'm no longer thinking about it. I'm just not. But I don't think about that till much later because I have to think about it again. It's warfare in the mind.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Yes, Seth.
if I can attack that at maybe a different angle.
Sure. Please
I
do.
think that without denying anything you're saying about it being against your wife and that sort of thing, I find, at least in my own life, that for me, it really comes down to a root of idolatry, self-worship. Because what it is saying at the end of the day is not just that my wife isn't good enough, it's that I deserve whatever gratification I believe my flesh is worthy of. And so for me, the underlying issue there is a self-idolatry issue. As far as like you're saying, you know, training our mind, I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's two things I would say to that. One is that if you actually start to take inventory of the way that you think throughout the day, you will find that there is a pattern to the way that we think. There's a pattern to the way that we think, especially in light of how we live, what we're putting before us. It doesn't mean that, I'm not saying that you can remove all thoughts and temptations, but
There is a lot you can do.
but as quick as the temptation can come up, what is it that we tend to wrestle with? Do we try to think of, boy, well, how am I going to get out of this? Or is it something that we've trained our minds to where when the temptation comes up, we already know what the answer is? The scriptures say this. You know, that I think it's telling if we have to wrestle with, I'm not sure what to do here, it means that we have not studied out what does the Bible say about this. Because if we have, and we've trained our minds to think that way, the answer will be there when we hit the temptation. So now the fight becomes a lot easier because you already know what weapon to use. You're not standing there going, well, I don't know what to do with this.
At that moment, it's almost too late.
Well,
Because you're not fleeing.
and another thing is, and I see this all the time, and I'm so sad when I hear this, is preacher after preacher after preacher will get up and say, we need to fight sexual temptation. We need to fight sexual temptation. We do not find me one time in Scripture you're ever told to fight sexual immorality. Not one time. Flee. Flee. You fight the other sins, but this one, you turn and you run. You do everything you have to do to get away from that. And that's the problem is, we as men, in our egotistical self-worship, stand there and say, no, I can fight this one. And you're lying to yourself because not a one of us has ever won that fight. I don't know any guy who's ever stood there, fought that, and won that fight. He gets bowled over every time. And so I think the issue is, we need to take the Bible seriously. We fight the battles that say fight, and we flee from the battles that it says flee. We fill our minds with the Scriptures, and on a very practical level, to anybody who wants the link, I'd be happy to send. There's a great booklet called Sexual Detox. And it is an incredible little booklet on, he equates it really to if you're coming off a drug or if you're coming off of a substance abuse, that becomes a way of thinking in a way that you see things in a way of practice in life. And he equates that same thing and says, we have to do a biblical detox of our minds and of our bodies of this type of thought pattern. So I would be, anybody who's interested in that, maybe I'll try and find a way to post it.
You can put, yeah, we find a
On the
way to post
website,
it on the
something,
website or something like
yeah.
that. Yeah, the statement in Proverbs that we read this morning was, many weak men have been slain by her. Right? Not hardly. Many strong. That's quite a statement. Not a few strong. Many.
You can't be slain unless you're standing there trying to fight it.
That's right. Trying to fight. Yeah. Many strong men have been slain by her. Excuse me for a minute. I was standing my back feels better. Feeling like this.
I think something related to this, which is not also easy to talk about, but you know, modesty for our girls and our wives, and you know, what that means. But you know, there's temptation, you know, by our eyes. So I think that's something that we really need to be, as men, conscious of and teaching our girls and wives what we think and what we see and when we see what we see, how that is interpreted in our mind. So because we're men.
Sure.
So I don't know if you want to speak.
Yeah, if I can just address that briefly. This modesty thing comes up, right? And some people poo-poo it. And others are like, well, what's modest? and want to talk about, lengths of skirts, that kind of a thing. The Bible really doesn't tell us those kind of answers. But, as husbands and fathers, we have some kind of an idea. And we can run our houses based on what we know is tempting. And we don't have to dress our daughters as prostitutes. Honestly, have you been to the mall recently? Are you kidding me? If we're taking the world for our, it's a complete disaster. And yes, we do need to, as husbands and fathers, have influence in what our daughters and wives are going to walk around in. It's basic stuff here. And we can't go, since the Bible doesn't tell me how long my skirt should be, I guess I can go around with nothing on. That's sort of how we reason that. It's nonsensical. Thank you for that. Who else didn't anticipate this kind of reaction? It's good. Thankful for it. Good questions all the way around. Yes, Beth.
This is more of a comment. I went last week to see, they're actually showing it today, a documentary called The Playground about, I hate this term even, child sex tourism in the United States. And it's a completely secular viewpoint documentary. But I thought it was very interesting, a woman who's worked with the guys who buy, not the guys who prostitute the young, but the people who come and pay. And she said they've never been taught delayed gratification, that exactly what you both have said. I want what I want when I want it, it's all about me. But I think that as parents, we should be listening to that and saying, how are we indulging our children today so that they don't have that delayed gratification? They don't have any sense of a biblical taking a thought captive or putting off. So I don't know, I just think that that's important for parents to realize that these things that the Bible tells us to raise our children to be and to do are for a reason in every spectrum of life. Not just so that they'll be obedient little children at home, but so that they'll be good citizens later.
Yeah, a lot that could be said about that. Let me just address this part of it and say that we live in a time when we don't, the idea of disciplining our children, directing them. I keep going back to what God said about Abraham in Genesis 18. For I know him that he will command his children after my ways. Command. For how many folks today is the idea of Abraham commanding his children to obey God? That's like, you can't do that. And so instead of delayed gratification, we have the exact opposite going on. I think in a lot of cases, indulging. We indulge everything the child wants as an idea of how to make the child happy. And the child never gets happy because their demands just get greater and greater and greater, don't they? And, I know John Bingaman, he's an economics guy, our other elder here, he always talks about limited resources and how limited resources are a good thing. And they're a great thing in the family because if you have limited resources in the family, then you can't indulge a child, can you? You can't do it. But if you decide that you're just going to, you're just going to indulge it, whatever the child wants, the child's going to get. That's pretty terrifying that according to this secular movie, if you indulge your son, you are turning him into a predator. Pretty scary. I want to, actually, I have to think a lot more about that. But it was so easy back perhaps in the day when you could give your 8-year-old a job, so you got to stack that wood, and you know what? If you don't stack that wood, we're going to freeze. So you just have to do it. We have limited resources here. I would argue that one of the greatest lessons on limited resources is one man, one woman. You get one wife. What a resource. Use that one resource. instead of dumping on her and going for other resources. I'm kind of scatterbrained when I think about this, but we live in an indulgent society, and it's killing us. It is killing us. It's killing us dead. Yeah, we have one more from Shep.
I have a comment about modesty. I
Yeah.
think for ladies, as I heard this said, if the wife or the girl's dressing up for somebody else, you know, other than her husband, you know, that's how a girl should know, because there are women, wives, who don't dress for their husband. They dress when they're going out. They're dressing for other people, you know, and they're dressing, you know, and I also heard that, you know, when women start working out more and they're doing more and there's something going on, you know, and the husband same way. If he's, you know, working out more than he used to and he's starting to, you know, there's something fishy going on. So I think that's a rule of thumb for the person. You can never know the heart of other people, but a rule of thumb is if you're dressing, a lady's dressing for other people in a sexual manner too, because I mean you want to look presentable, but in that sense, then your heart's not in the right place, you know, because your husband is who you're supposed to.
Yeah, that's not a yellow flag. That's a red flag with red lights and sirens, or it should be. All right, thank you so much for your attention here. It took a lot more time. Kids, once again, you've been gems. We'll go ahead with communion at this point. Just Toby, if you would come up, please.